97.3 ESPN presents The Sports Bash with Mike Gill. It's time for Football at 4 with Geoff Mosher.
I think our track record in the last 20 years, how many NFC East titles, playoff appearances, and appearances in the NFC Championship game, those are some of the metrics I look at, and I'll compare our record with almost anybody.
Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
Yes, it is. Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It drops this morning at 6 a.m., Thursday at 6 a.m., and it's brought to you by Dr. Lyle M. Back. For everything from skincare to cosmetic surgery, go to ilovelyle.back.com or call 856-MAKEOVER for Dr. Lyle M. Back, proud sponsor of Football at 4. Geoff Mosher is in the house from the Inside the Birds podcast, and if you're watching the show live on our video stream at 973ESPN.com, you can see him right there along with us. Geoff, welcome back to the program. How are you?
A, I'm great. I hope you guys had a good weekend. B, I'm really excited for this Football at 4 because I absolutely know neither of you have to ask me where Carson Wentz is going to be traded to and when it's going to happen. And C, if I can just kind of go back to a conversation you guys were having a few minutes ago, Hunter, when people think CCM, the first thing that comes to their mind is hockey, right? When you ask me what's the first thing that comes to my mind, if you say Bauer, I say Trevor. I'm sorry, but Mike is right on this. CCM is hockey, and hockey is CCM. All right? It's just like Jordan and Jumpman.
I think I even think a Reebok in hockey ahead of Bauer.
Well, that's flawed. How about this? Did you hear my did you hear my scented socks idea?
Yeah, that was a weird one.
This is unbelievable.
I'm not sure I'm with you on that.
Do you think Carson Wentz is going to get traded?
Do I think he wears scented socks?
I can see that.
Oh, man.
You might.
Do you think he was hard to coach?
I do. I do.
So that's really...
Maybe it's because he wore scented socks. I don't know.
That's a strong possibility,
Yeah,
right?
Maybe.
Or maybe the coach didn't wear scented socks and he wanted nothing to do with that guy. That's one of the the aftermath of a guy getting traded and having an ugly divorce is that all this stuff starts to come out. One of them, which is, and we've kind of heard this before, Geoff, is that he was very, but a lot of teammates were also kind of suggesting, this is from an Albert Breer report, that he was hard to coach. He was a hard guy to kind of have in the building, but we had heard this stuff before.
Yes. I'm glad you brought that up.
You want to go answer the phone real fast?
No, that's my third line. That's my landline.
Oh,
I
third
should probably
line.
try to figure out a way to
Jeez.
quiet it. I know, right?
Jeez.
It's like my non-business line. But I would say this. I'm glad you mentioned that we've heard it before because, and I give Adam Kaplan a lot of credit on this. When we first started doing Inside the Birds in August of 2018, going into the season, Adam said one of the storylines of the year that has to be taken into account, because back then it was more about Carson coming back from the ACL surgery. But one of the underlying themes that Adam talked about was, how is Carson going to come back to this team and adjust without John DeFilippo and Frank Reich there? And Adam brought to the light that Carson was a very hard-headed guy coming out of North Dakota State. Doesn't make him a bad guy. A lot of quarterbacks are like this, but that he was very stubborn, likes what he likes, doesn't like what he doesn't like. And he and DeFilippo had to butt heads quite a bit before DeFilippo was able to rein him in. And then obviously Mike Rowe became the offensive coordinator, and we saw the struggles there. And then, a guy like Press Taylor, who was opposite. He was more of a coddler of Carson Wentz, but still things around Carson were going south, whether it be injuries or the drafting of Jalen Hurts or Doug Peterson, his relationship there. And so, it all kind of created the perfect storm for this year where some of the things we talked about in the past really came into fruition. And I'll mention this real quick. When Joe Santoliquito wrote that story a couple of years ago, the Philly Voice story that got a lot of attention, Adam, when we did our podcast, we weren't like throwing Joe under the bus at all. We had actually said, a lot of the things that Joe is pointing out here are true about Carson Wentz and that we had heard about him. It doesn't make him a bad person. And I think people have also said this, like when you're winning, it doesn't look that bad because you're walking the walk. You may be, very demanding. You may have preferences, but when you're playing well, no one's going to stop you from having those demands and preferences. But when things change around you and you don't do as well and you're still that guy and you don't adapt to the surroundings, then it's going to come down on you, as it should.
Now, part of this report was that him and Groh had some problems, and here Groh is now the wide receivers coach. Not that they're going to have to work together all that much, but I found that interesting was that, hey, Groh is now a part of this staff. I guess, Taylor being there too kind of maybe, changes the dynamics there a little bit. But look, if all these guys, Groh included, is saying, yeah, this guy was difficult to deal with, I think this is going to be an interesting situation of him walking into a spot where he didn't get along with this guy.
Well, you notice that the Colts lost a couple of coaches there, pass game coordinator. Did they lose their offensive coordinator? Oh, yes. His name is Nick Sirianni, right? And he's now the Eagles coach. But you'll notice that Mike Groh was not promoted into any of those spots, I don't believe. I think he is still just the wide receivers coach there. I'll give a second check to that. But, yeah, I mean, I think that's because the Colts knew that there was a strong possibility that they were going to land Carson Wentz, and obviously you don't want to have these things going on with you. Mike Groh, he may not be the wide receivers coach, but I don't think he wasn't like promoted to quarterbacks coach. If I'm not, I think he's still wide receivers coach there. So yeah, I don't see him having to be in the same room all the time with Carson Wentz.
Right. Let's now obviously there's a lot with Wentz coming out after the fact here. Albert Breer in the MMQB talked about all this stuff soon after the season ended. But I guess the next question really kind of jumping forward for Philly is, what do they do at the quarterback position now that Wentz is out, now that we're kind of moving forward to free agency and the draft? Does number 6, do they try to trade up? Is a quarterback strongly in play for the Eagles?
That's a great question. And to me, a lot of it comes down to how does Nick Sirianni and his staff evaluate Jalen Hurts based on last year's performance, but also going back to college and their evaluations of him back then. I think it would be egregious to just look at the last 4 games of last year and make your evaluation there. And we'll have to see how he feels about it. I do think it's critical, and we mentioned this in the podcast this morning, to understand, and this is, without bias, this is just me objectively looking at it, that when you have a new coaching staff come in and do their own evaluations, you really have no idea what they're thinking of that guy, and they have no allegiances to that guy. So from that standpoint, they have to evaluate what they think of Jalen Hurts really is, and then they have to do their diligence because they're picking 6 overall on pretty much every quarterback who could go in the first round, including Trevor Lawrence, just in case. And what they have to, in my opinion, what they have to do is determine, do any of these guys project? And when I say these guys, I mean the whether it's Justin Fields or Zach Wilson or Trey Lance or whoever, do they project to be better than what they think of Jalen Hurts? And if they do, if they really fall in love with one of these guys and think this has got to be a guy that we have because we can get him because it's going to change our franchise around, then you have to do it. That's my opinion. I don't see why you wouldn't do that if you were a coach and felt that way. I mean, Jalen Hurts is still here as the backup, even if you do, unless they decide to trade him. I don't know. But I think that's how most coaches and front offices would deal with that situation. It's all based on their evaluation, and they're on both parties here, the incumbent and what's out there.
Yeah, last year, Jalen Hurts obviously didn't have the OTAs and the training camp and the preseason, and he was coming into a situation where Carson Wentz was here with the big money. So the mentality was, look, he probably knew what his role was, but now that he's entering the season with this whole new debacle, it's like, hey, I have an opportunity to win this job out and be the starter. How important do you think it is with this new mentality, with this new fresh, idea that, hey, I can be this guy, could play a big role in what he grows into for next season?
Yeah, you're talking about Jalen, right?
Yeah, Jalen Hurts, yeah.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I think Jalen just needs to continue to be doing what he's doing. He's going to work out with some wide receivers soon. He's going to take command of this team as if he's the number 1 quarterback, which he very likely will be. I mean, even if the Eagles wanted to get a quarterback at 6, there's no guarantee that they're going to be there or be able to move up. So he should just continue to do everything he's done. He has endeared himself well to the fan base, the organization, as far as character and leadership and things of that nature. I don't think he has to do anything differently. I don't think he has to act differently. We've already seen his workouts with Quincy Avery, right? As far as we know, he's putting the work in. So it's really not in his control anymore, other than just don't go out there and do something that could, make you lose favor with the organization. If he can just continue to do what he's doing, he'll be in a good spot and he'll be given the opportunity to be the starter or at least compete for the starter. And that's the mentality he should take.
Geoff Mosher, Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Over at InsideTheBirds.com, Geoff, you wrote something that's kind of interesting. You sound similar to what I've kind of been saying, is that predictions of doom and gloom, in your view, is an exaggeration. Now, that's not you saying they're going to be a playoff team or a Super Bowl contender, but what is your reason why you think maybe people think that a 4-12 or 5-11 type of season might be outlandish?
Yeah, so I know some people might say, aren't you the same guy that wrote last week that this team is, knee deep in turmoil and completely dysfunctional? And yes, as I wrote in that piece, not much has changed from that standpoint. So they can certainly screw a lot of things up from up top. But if you just look at the 53-man right now, or projected, most teams, even if you have some question mark at quarterback, even if you're not great, in the secondary or linebacker, most teams are good if they are good in the trenches. So if you look at the Eagles' offensive line and you assume that Jason Kelsey, Brandon Brooks, and Lane Johnson come back and they're healthy and they're, even close to what they normally are, that's pretty good. And then you've got Mailata and Seumalo, or what I would say is Mailata at left tackle and Seumalo. We'll see. Maybe Dillard beats him out. But the bottom line is that right side there is pretty rock solid. And then on the other end, I'm pretty sure Brandon Graham's going to be back. I know they have to shave a lot of money off, but I don't see him being the first guy to go. So I'm assuming he'll be back. Javon Hargrave really came on at the end of last year. Fletcher Cox will be back. Josh Sweat, I imagine, will be back on an extension along with Barnett. So that's pretty good. So now that to me says they're strong enough to be a pretty competitive team, put some pressure on the quarterback, hold up the quarterback on their end, get a running game going. We'll see what Nick Sirianni likes to do. But to me, the worst teams are usually the ones that are just turmoil in the trenches. They don't have any pass rushers. They don't have anybody that can block for the quarterback and keep them upright. And if these guys are healthy and they come back and are a semblance of what they are, I think the Eagles can be more competitive than just another. I've heard a lot of people say they're just going to be another 3, 4, 5 win team next year. And I don't see it that way.
No, I agree with you with that. And when you were talking about the offensive line, the one name that sparked a little light bulb in my head was Jason Kelsey. Do we have any information or know anything about the future of Jason Kelsey?
Not yet. Adam Kaplan addressed it on the podcast this morning. It was his understanding that Jason does what he normally does in the offseason, take some time, decompress, try to figure things out, see what how his body is feeling, and then kind of it's almost like Groundhog Day, and you just wait for him to pop out and declare whether he's coming back or not. So we'll see. But I will say I think the Eagles are in a decent position to be able to replace him and still be fairly strong. And if he does not come back, or if they want to cut him for cap related issues, then Isaac Seumalo is a guy who's played well at left guard and projected to be a center in the league, and that would open up your left guard spot. Jack Driscoll, who we all remember started right tackle in the season opener last year as a rookie, is a guy that a lot of personnel people told me can move to guard, probably projected, if not right tackle, then at guard, as long as you put a little bit more weight on him. He's got good athleticism. He played at Auburn in that, that RPO-driven offense, so he's agile. He can move around. So I'm not saying he would definitely be the left guard, but he can at least compete with maybe a Nate Herbig. By the way, Nate Herbig could also be, who started his Eagles career at a center and was a good run blocker last year and not an awful pass protector. He certainly needs to work on it, but sometimes things go haywire and you just blame the last guy on the, or the worst perceived guy on the line. But Herbig wasn't as bad as maybe the press that he got. I thought he got better as the year went along. So he's another guy who could take over at center.
Geoff, we'll leave you with this as we have a lot of off-season questions. They got to get under this cap. How they're going to do it. There's some big names that make a lot of money. Do you see a big name getting released to help get under the cap? Or traded, I guess, would be another, way, like a Fletcher Cox, a Brandon Graham, Brandon Brooks we kind of hit on a couple weeks ago. Who else would be in that magnitude? Darius Slay?
Zach Ertz. I mean, unless
Zach
we're already
Ertz.
moving past Zach Ertz, but that's definitely one guy that I'm almost positive will be gone.
Roddy McLeod is another one.
Well, that's interesting because he's coming back from the ACL, and if he's not medically cleared and you try to cut him, then you have to reach an injury settlement, you probably have to pay what his contract is at that point. So it's almost not to their advantage to be able to do that. And it'll be hard to trade him. And plus, they're so young in the secondary. And Rodney actually played fairly well. So even if he comes back at a little bit, less than what he was because of the injury again, you can probably mix and get him out there in certain packages that cater to his strengths, maybe just becoming a rundown type of safety. We'll see. But I will say the Eagles always have a tendency to surprise us every offseason, right? So Zach Ertz is kind of a name. We can go through names. That's why I mentioned Brandon Brooks a while with you, as far as maybe trade bait, because that's kind of the outside the box move that nobody's really talking about, but that would save them a lot of money if they're able to trade him. Same thing with Lane Johnson. I mean, I can't see it happening, but he certainly has to get money off the books, and he has to do it not just to get money off the books, but also to reshape the roster and really build for tomorrow. So if you're a veteran and you're approaching 30 or over 30, you mentioned Darius Slay, Mike. I mean, he's a guy they just brought in because they were trying to still win a Super Bowl. But I mean, does it make sense to have that salary on the books this year if you're not expecting to be that good? At the same point, you don't want to be terrible either. So I don't know. It's probably a guy that they have to make a decision on internally.
Yeah, when we had Rob Motti on, he threw the name out of Hargrave, and it was similar to like what you said with Lane Johnson. We're like, I can't imagine it, but they threw the name out there. Could you see a situation where they let go of a guy who they just brought in here just recently?
Well, I haven't looked at his contract lately, but because they just signed him last year, I feel like that would be a massive cap hit. Although he only signed a 3-year deal, and I'm going to guess because of that most of his money did clear in year one. So yes, I guess there's a possibility, but I would ask, why would you, if you're trying to build this roster right around your young dynamic talent, why would you get rid of Hargrave and hold on to Fletcher Cox? I mean, I see no reason to have to get rid of both, or either, but I would think you'd want to go with your younger, generation here.
Well, they got a lot of tough decisions to make. And, you just mentioned something that kind of perked my interest is, what if you just say, look, we're not going to be good this year. Let's move on from Fletcher. Let's move on from Brandon Graham. And you kind of try to trade those guys and get those numbers off and just kind of get as much draft capital as you can. You almost go kind of like what the Browns did and just start collecting picks.
Well, you have to be careful, though, because, first of all, if they did that and then took the same approach with Brooks and Johnson, then there goes my theory about being strong in the trenches and competitive. I say you have to be careful because, look, you have the opportunity, if you determine Jalen Hurts is your guy, or if you pick number 6 overall, to be able to build yourself back in a manner that's not going to take 2, 3, or 4 years. I mean, next year is kind of a year, but if your quarterback's good and your lines are still good next year and you're able to win 6, 7, and 8 and then add on the following offseason, then by 2022, you might be thinking of your team the same way they thought of their team in 2017 when they won the Super Bowl. So, and I'm not saying that that's going to happen. I'd be careful about getting rid of guys who you think might still have a couple of good years left in you who have been building blocks for this franchise before. Yeah, of course, some of them are going to have to go. In other words, like Zach Ertz is going to go because they have Dallas Goedert, right? They're not just doing it because they're saving money. It's because they have a successor. So I would be careful about cutting guys where you don't have a successor. I mean, Brandon Graham gets cut. Who are you putting out there at defensive end? Because Sweat can only be a situational guy, and Barnett really hasn't showed that he's.
You think it's a slam dunk that Barnett?
3-down guy.
You think it's a slam dunk that Barnett's back?
I would lean that way more than other. I don't think he's back at $10 million. I think that the either he accepts whatever team-friendly contract extension they'll give him that will lower that number, or he doesn't and then gets cut and goes into a very awkward free agency where A, he's not been that productive, and B, teams only a couple of teams have a lot of money to spend. So I don't know if I want to take my chances going into free agency and then not get the contract that the Eagles even offered me.
Geoff Mosher, Inside the Birds, the podcast is out today. It's the new one. The latest one is out. You can get it wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll have a new one on Thursday. And it looks like Inside the Birds has a new show.
Oh, yeah. I'm really excited about it. Thanks for bringing that up. We are bringing in former Eagles receiver Jason Avant and former Eagles safety Quentin Michael. They're going to tag team on a show. We're calling it Q&A. And it's going to be a lot like some of our other shows in the past, Tales from the Blind Side or Grill and the Birds. It's going to be two former Eagles doing a lot of analysis. The cool thing is Jason did that Bill Walsh scholarship internship with the Eagles. So he was very close to the situation. Plus, we're going to be able now to really analyze the Eagles' defensive backs with Q and their wide receivers with Jason really well. We focused a lot on the offensive line this past year because we had guys like Jamal Jackson and Trey Thomas and Todd Hermans. And certainly receiver and corner have been and safety have been issues for this team. So I'm looking forward to their perspective. They're going to watch a lot of tape and even get into the draft. So I'm excited. It's going to be their first show will be next Wednesday. So I think it's March 3rd. It'll drop.
All right, very cool. We will keep people up to date on that and how you can consume it and get it all through the Inside the Birds podcast. And, of course, the latest one is out. The new one drops Thursday. And right here on Football at 4, we'll have plenty more on the Eagles offseason, free agency, some NFL, and more here on the Sports Bash. Geoff Mosher, everybody, at Geoff Mosher NFL. And it is Football at 4 powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Thanks, man.
All right, fellas, on with your scented socks.
We will do our best with the scented socks to see how we can put those together.